and I wanted to just greet you as we are waiting for a few more attendees to arrive. I see the count increasing as I'm speaking. So let's give it another moment or two, let a few more people join, and we will start in a few moments. All right, let's get started. Fasten your seatbelts. Another action-packed ride this week. I did take some good advice from you guys from last week. Too many slides and not enough detail. We're going to get into the weeds today. This is going to be some technical detail of the interface, the information that you want to see that is going to get kind of technical, kind of difficult. But that means that you're getting the detail that you haven't really seen anywhere else, and that's why we brought in very special subject matter expert Chris Slovak today. So let's kick off with a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll move on into the nitty-gritty. So slide 2 there talks about the housekeeping. What we are doing is we're going to record this for future reference, right? We'll make the recording available online. So if you go to the partner area of the website and you pull down to the recordings, you'll see somewhere webinar 4, our data access solution set. The Q&A panel is available for your use. Please drop your questions in there. We didn't get many questions last week. We got about 2 or 3. For any questions that you have that you're wondering about, you're curious about, please use the Q&A panel, the chat window there, and we can, or no, actually it's the questions window. We'll watch for that. And we'll address those both interactively throughout the session, and we'll also do it towards the end of the meeting as well. This is, again, like I said, business and technical audience intended to make sure that people can understand what the importance of the data collection, maybe even database capabilities are for. So the skill set would be those individuals that know how to spell EDW, wink, wink, enterprise data warehouse detail, know the importance of getting a handle of your data and then integrating that with other data sources. So we're going to talk about the third leg of the Telium stool, right? We've got IQ and Audience Stream, of course. But what about the data collection, right? The data unification, the power behind that, that's what we're going to cover today. And also leveraging new or existing business intelligence platforms. We'll even show you what it looks like in Tableau. And then you can extrapolate from there and continue on to tie data into an enterprise data warehouse. And we'll show you, the two-way connectivity through the omni-channel data upload. There's the absolute data ownership, but we're not going to go into the principles so much as let's just kick into the presentation. There's a couple of slides, do some level set, but like I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and get into the live interface, much like everybody's looking to do. So I would like to introduce to you Chris Slovak, the head of sales engineering here at Telium. He heads up the global role of all of the technical individuals around the planet, and everybody looks to him for he's the guy in the know. So we go to him with all our questions, and Chris is always spot on with the answers. So we really look forward to having Chris, on the presentation today. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. A little bit about Chris. So he is AdWords certified, Microsoft accredited, got some background in Yahoo and a variety of other sources. What's interesting is he's a surfer. You wouldn't know it by looking at him. I guess you could. I could see that in you, actually, but I didn't know you lived in Australia for a while. So how long did you live in Australia, Chris?
A little bit over a year.
Awesome. Now you're in San Diego, and you still keeping up your surfing skills?
No, just more internet stuff than surfing anymore.
That makes perfect sense. Cool deal. Well, let's kick it off. What do you have for us today? What's the topic du jour?
Well, thanks everybody. Hopefully you guys can hear me all well. I literally have like 3 slides just to set some touch points, and then I'm going to show you a lot of the product. So I think everyone at this point knows, Tealium as a whole and our customer data platform. That stuff over on the right-hand side, that's what we're going to talk about today. The various ways in which that we can provide data access to the data that Tealium touches. And I break that out in really sort of 2 distinctive data sets, one being an event data set and the other being an audience data set. And as you know, Audience Stream is really trying to create a singular sort of data set against an individual and then deliver that to every vendor within the digital marketing ecosystem, including the enterprise data warehouse. And so, the clickstream data that Audience Stream is collecting can be packaged up and stored, but we can also create that data set around the user and store that as well. And we're going to talk about how we can provide data to enterprise data warehouses, or actually do some hosting so that you can plug visualization solutions on top of it. There are 2 different data types: event level data, right, clicks and page views, and audience level data, people. That's going to include all your Audience Stream badges. It's going to include even the omni-channel data that's been imported into the system. And it even includes what actions, audiences, and tags a user has actually seen. So we'll show you that today. From a delivery sense, there's really 3 different ways that we deliver this data, whether it be a semi-structured data set that we collect, aggregate, and store, a structured data set that we host and create, so we actually do the ETL and put it into a database, or we can feed this data direct from our systems, direct from the page in the case of the event level data, to a customer endpoint or customer collected endpoint. So you're going to hear me talk about, store, DB, and direct, and we're going to talk about event and audience level data. The event delivery formats are as follows. The event direct will actually create a call direct from the page to a non-Tealium server, a customer collection endpoint, or a partner endpoint. The event store solution will actually send the event level data into a Tealium collector. We actually have a back-end system that will let a end user customize what data feeds to store, and we'll store those on Amazon S3 in JSON files. We'll show you that today. And then EventDB goes through the same process of going to the collector and then making its way into the Amazon S3 bucket. But we have a proprietary solution that will actually use the Tealium IQ data structure to create a schema and produce a structured RDBMS ready product in Redshift. So the nice thing there is you can take data, the data layer, right from the page, and put it right into a database in Redshift that you can put on any visualization solution, Tableau as an example that we're going to use today to show. But really any solution that's RDBMS ready, or if someone wants to write SQL, they can do that within Redshift.
Chris, question on the top row there of the event store, the event information for Event Direct. So the value there, non-Tealium server, is this an indication of taking data and then sending that over to a customer server, right? If they provide us an IP address, is that what that's doing, is taking the data and then sending it straight from the page over to their server for data collection? Is that the idea on that one?
Yes, we found that we have partners and customers alike that have varying degrees of collection facilities. Some have their own stack set up, right, and they have their, a collection endpoint, they have a big Hadoop machine, and then they've got scientists that can run through and cluster it. And then we have other partners who are on the other scale of that, which is, I really want to have my data somewhere, but I don't have any of the facilities or the know how to do it. So Tealium, can you do it? That's exactly what Event Direct is made to do, is to just literally take the data and point that fire hose towards somebody else's machine so that they can collect that data. Of course, if we're doing that, none of the schema building, none of the generation, none of the filtering, right, is at play. So the customer has to do all of that work. Whereas on the sort of other scale of that, on the Event DB. Telium does all the heavy lifting and the hosting.
Makes sense. And that second row there for Event Store, if the data is going from Telium to a Telium collector, well, that's effectively a Telium server going over to Amazon S3. So is that a client-server hybrid? Is that a server-side? Is that a server-to-server? What's the technology there? I mean, that's definitely not client-side, right? So Event Store, is that a server-to-server type of a function?
Yeah, it's a server-based system. So the endpoint Telium has configured within our Amazon stack. It will collect that data, and then through the actual audience stream interface, you can direct those live events into what we call streams or filtered streams. Those streams can actually create buckets within Amazon S3 that the customer can then process. The nice thing about Event Store, from a value perspective, outside the technology, is a lot of our partners are starting to use it as a carbon copy of critical data. So they'll turn on Event Store and collect data on all the confirmation pages so that they have a backup of every order that's come through. And they don't have to necessarily rely on the data in, say, Web Analytics. They've got a carbon copy of it. Makes it really easy to do audits because the data that IQ saw is the same data that went out to all the vendors. And now you have a carbon copy of that critical data sitting there on Amazon for uses of auditing. We've even had partners say, please store this up. And then when they onboard a new vendor, they'll take that data and process it through the vendor's API so that that vendor starts on day one with 6 months of historical data, as an example.
Very good use cases. And so I want to point out to the partners that, it used to be Telium IQ client-side technology. If you talk about server-to-server and client-server hybrid, we're leveraging each of those technologies in the ways that they're meant to be. And, so there's no client-side only anymore with Telium. There are different ways of collecting data, sending data, representing data, and making sure that, the customers are getting the value out of the information. And I just want to highlight there are some server-side impacts and some client-server hybrid details. So we never want to get into a client-side only type of a conversation. That's what I wanted to highlight there. And the same principles apply for the next slide as well as the audience delivery as well. So I'll not steal your thunder.
No problem. So we have the same sort of process here in terms of the delivery formats, but it's a little bit different because Audience Stream is the collection endpoint here, right? Audience Stream is that real-time segmentation and action engine that is able to collect that data and then build those data sets into users, right, into visitors. From Audience Stream, instead of doing simple sort of web requests, we have the ability to create web hooks, and web hooks are now becoming quickly a standard in sort of generic APIs. Audience Store, very similar to what we're seeing in the Event Store. We can store that data on Amazon's S3 bucket. And then Audience DB, which is, in my opinion, probably the most exciting of the solutions here, because the data that's coming from IQ is kind of inherently unstructured. Audience Stream as creating a pseudo schema against these users, because we're creating user data sets, and because it's an agile system, because people can add in new segments and add in new badges, creating a schema that makes that data mineable is very challenging, and we've done that. And that's actually part of the proprietary solution, where you go update something in Audience Stream, you add a new badge. Within 5 minutes, the database that's on Redshift is updated with that new badge, with that new schema, and ready to be mined. So the principles are the same, right? Audience Direct, the customer, the consumer of the can get that data. The store is a queue, right, a historical sort of file-based queue of that data. And then Audience DB is a mineable, live-hosted data set on Amazon's Redshift. So that's it for slides. I wanted to jump into the product here and actually show you where these touch points are, unless there's any other questions on the slides. I will keep going. So to kick us off, everyone's very familiar with Telium IQ. The entirety of the data access solutions revolve around a very specific tag. We call it the Telium Collect tag. This tag, it really just collects the data layer as it stands and filters that data layer out into the Telium collection point, or we can turn it on to a customer endpoint, and that's actually defined here within the server call. So if you wanted to, do Event Direct, as we call it, we would literally put in a customer's URL right here, and the data would flow out. Considering we wanted to get technical today, I wanted to show you one of those calls coming from Tealium, and it looks like this. So this is the actual payload coming out of the Tealium collect tag, and if we go ahead and post this in here, it's just a really nice JSON object, and it contains the configuration from Tealium so that you actually know what tags fired. And as we go down in here, we'll start to look and see the data object, the actual data that exists on the page in a clean and easy to read data set, and already prefixed so that you understand the type of the data. So it makes it really easy for our customers to understand, okay, this was metadata, this was a cookie, this was a domain component. You know, if it's a cookie or a first-party cookie, we actually call that out as well. And then, of course, since this is an event-level action, we create sort of basic browser information, but less important is, or more important rather, is the fact that we tell you what type of an event it is. As you're all partners, you're hopefully aware at this point that Tealium has two general event types. You can create more if the customer needs, but we have the view and the link, right? The content view, or a link, which really represents a user interaction. And then, of course, the post time, right? Because it's all about an event, so there's a time on that event. So this effectively is your event direct solution. Right from the page, the entire data layer packaged up with some additional components pushed out into the customer's collection point. Now, if Tealium is a collection point, Event Store or Event DB, you can actually start to monitor and create the live stream events through Audience Stream. Now, you don't need Audience Stream to have Event Store. We just happen to use the Audience Stream interface for this. But within this interface, what you can create are various filtered streams of events. And the way that we can do those is simply by clicking on the Add Stream button here. So I'll click on that. And I can title the live stream. So this might be, in this case, a confirmation page. And I can use any of the data that's actually triggering. This is much like a load rule, right? Where I can say, look at the data that's coming inbound, and because the data is on a particular page, and because it contains confirmation, as my example was earlier, I want to create this stream. And I want to create a store of this, a specific bucket, store on Amazon S3 for the data coming in this particular condition. Now, we've already done that, obviously. We're looking at Tealium data, and you can see it flowing in here right now. We can see the actual calls that were being made. We can understand, you know, where the calls are coming from, and what's kind of happening within that data layer. Now, once I've created my streams, I can actually view my streams that are actually sitting out there on Amazon's S3 through the Tealium interface. I can actually get my keys as well, so that if I wanted to give this to my developer, I can give them that access, and they could actually connect to that, you know, programmatically. To make it easy for everybody, I've already downloaded one, and I've got that file right here. And similar to the data that was passed to us earlier on in the direct call, we've done a little bit of processing to clean it up, but generally speaking, it's still a JSON object that contains all of the information regarding the actual request. It's a little bit cleaner because it's gone through our process, and we've added in some metadata on each of these components versus sort of the raw call. But you can see here is the data that would be existing in those files. From a processing perspective, we'll process those files every 15 minutes or when they reach 2 megabytes. So we'll create, you know, an individual file that would contain several requests within it.
Hey, Chris.
I'll pause there for questions. Yeah.
A couple thoughts. Number one, is there a way to zoom in a little bit? You're on a high resolution, and so some of these details are pretty small. And yeah, zooming in helps for people to visualize what you're showing and see the details. We can see in generality. Now, this information, this is all JSON information. I noticed you're using something to view the JSON in a nice little neat pattern. What is that you're using?
I just using JSON or JavaScript beautifier.org. You could use any text editor or parser just to clean it up. Otherwise, it's going to be us talking about files that look like this, which are a lot more difficult to see how clean the data is.
Good point. Yeah, very good. So it's a good little tip and trick there. And then for the event data, right, we've got all the metadata and so forth. So if we have these records, these would be in if these are in files, right, that are in the JSON JavaScript object notation, and then those get collected. How frequently do those get turned over, right? These files will collect until a certain point. Do they get collected until rotated on an hourly basis, or what's the frequency there?
We will queue up calls for up to 15 minutes and then create a single file for that 15-minute increment. Or if the number of calls equals a 2 megabyte file, we will queue it up and put it in. So the idea being you'll get a file that's optimized, right, either by time or by size, so it's easy to maneuver these. What we're looking at here is a single call. Most files will contain multiple calls in them, right? And we'll be adding those calls into the file up to 15 minutes or 2 megabytes to the size of the file.
Awesome, thanks. All right.
So the last sort of event level data set that I want to discuss is the DB. So we've shown you direct from page what the object looks like out to the customer's endpoint. We've shown you Tealium can collect that data and we can create streams of that data that will then go into various Amazon S3 buckets based on both time and the size of the files. And we can additionally run that data through a schema builder, right, and take the data that's been created and add it to Amazon's Redshift. So, there's no interface for that because it's a database. I'm going to use Tableau to show you that data, but I wanted to just show you here that actually in the interface, the customer can get the credentials that are necessary to access that database. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to Tableau. I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to talk about the event DB connection that I have here. Can you see this, Sean? Is that too small?
We could zoom. We could stand to zoom in just a touch more. Yeah, because the text is really small, right? So it's a big white space. But
let's see if I can scroll this up here.
There's a Command plus to make it larger. Does that help?
Not with this. Well, let's.
It's pretty good as it is. People get the idea and they see what it is, and then you can see the event DB in the upper left and some good stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make that any bigger. Well,
yeah,
I'll keep going. So,
yeah,
what I'm connected to here is the event database for our demonstration today. To actually add these in is as simple as going into Tableau and putting in the credentials that we were just looking at into the Amazon Redshift connector. This is a driver in Tableau that you can download, but we've already done that to make it easy today. And you're met with two very distinctive tables, and we'll make sure this is center screen so that you can see them. The first being the actual event data, and the second being a visit-based table. So if you look closely at the event store, one of the components that we add in is a visitor ID. This is based on the cookie that's added by Tealium, just Tealium Tag Management. This will enable us to create essentially a visit table, right? So a queue of the visits. And for those of you that are familiar with Tableau, at that point in time, it simply becomes a drag and drop where we can take our count of visitors and our time, and we can start to look at things, within the scope of graphical interface. And of course, the underlying data is generated from that event store. And so here we can start to look at the actual calls that are being made. These are mobile calls that it looks like that we're seeing here. And if I scroll over, we can start to look at where it's coming from, what the event types are called, etc. Right? So we can still get to the underlying data. This is the actual data in the database, but we can use Tableau, Looker, Periscope. You can write SQL. Anything that you want to do, you can actually get to this data. In our opinions, one of the big benefits of having this data sitting in a Amazon Redshift is that you can use the best-in-breed visualization solutions, but it also means that the data layer has been pre-created and is actually now kind of point-and-click enabled, right? Where I don't have to know a collection directive or remove or sort of reprocess the data from a vendor's nomenclature back into my own. What I named it in the data layer is what it is named here in the database. So if I wanted to pull in information about page categories, I just drag it in, and now I can actually see the names of my page categories and understand the data about a particular point. So from a event level perspective, right? We've talked about passing data direct from the page to the customer to the endpoint that is somebody else's simply by adding a tag. We've talked about telling Tealium to collect that endpoint, building up those filters through our live streaming solution. Those filters either creating a store of that data, right, a file, a JSON object that's available on Amazon S3, or a database of that data that I can then access through Tableau. Now, the audience data set is much of the same. Instead of firing data off, though, from the web page, we actually can send that data through a webhook to any endpoint within the Tealium Audience Streams solution. So Tealium Audience Streams collected that data. It's created those audiences, those badges, those attributes as we call them. And now I can tell Audience Direct to simply point to an endpoint and post all the data about the visitor to a particular endpoint. So this would be a custom customer url.com/API usually. I can select what data goes into the header. I can actually tell Tealium to send the entire data object as well along with the actual call. And if necessary, I can make a decision on when. Maybe I only want to make a post out to that endpoint at the end of the visit, right? So when the stateful action takes place, the user actually becomes a cart abandonment. Now I want to send this data off. Within the interface, we have built out some solutions that will let you sample some of that data so that you can see what that looks like through our API sampler. You can filter this out through badges as well. These will provide little JSON objects. Those JSON objects look like this. Go in here and show you this. I've already formatted this one. Hopefully it's nice and big. But it will contain the ID of the user, and it'll start to create new JSON blocks for each of the different data types within the actual call. So here we're getting down into the audiences. Here are the properties, right, the traits that are set up, the sets, the badges that the user has been made, identifiers that are created against the user. And as we go further down, we'll start to understand against the event what tags were fired. Those came through that call, and then even so far as to get the actual data object. So actually here we're seeing the schema building, the user agent, the document elements, the UDO, right? As you all know, the universal data object. This is all the data that actually happened on the page. So now I know exactly the last known state of the user and the event that triggered that last known state, and this is all filtered direct to any endpoint simply by adding a specific connector. And I'll stop this query, but you can see a lot of the calls coming through today.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
So this live feed shows us a count of 114. That's 114 visitor profiles, right? All visitors.
14. It's actually 114 calls that have been executed, because these profiles, when you're talking about an audience direct call, it's the last known state of the user. So if I have configured my audience direct call to say, on every update to a user, fire off the data, you would actually know, okay, it was Chris, and here's the state of Chris, plus the event that Chris just did. If I went to the next page and clicked, there could be another state of Chris, right? Now he saw 2 pages versus 1 on this visit, and here's the event set. So these requests, they're actually at an individual user, and they're at an individual timestamp in terms of an event. So it's the combination of both the last known user data data set as well as the on-page event data set when you're talking about audience direct.
And that is updated when you're using multiple devices and multiple platforms, right? So you're able to see that visitor or that individual, and then they're using a particular browser. They're at the top of your window. Their browser type Safari, could be IE or Google. Device is iPad, about 3 rows above that one. So it does list cross devices, cross platforms, different browsers. It counts for all of that to update in that visitor record for cross device activity, right?
The entire attribute set that's been configured against AudienceStream, if a user has collected one of these attributes, that data is passed through that audience direct call as well as the event on the page that created that state.
That's good.
Now, Audience Store is much the same, where you essentially get a file set. And I know we're running out of time, but you would get a, similar to what we talked about with Event Store, you get a file set of these calls. But AudienceDB is a bit unique. Now, AudienceDB can be accessed to the Data Access Console as well, and we're going to dive into that data set here in a second. But instead of being a data set against an event, it's actually at a hierarchy that is the visitor, about the actual user themselves. So we can certainly look at data sets against creation times, and we can look at number of visitors over a specific time frame. But now we can actually start to compare data against these users in terms of how many users have a specific category, right? I can understand how many people in my database have the frequent visitor badge as an example. So instead of looking at these data sets in a linear fashion, I can actually look at the total population of all users within AudienceStream. I can mine that data any way I want because it's in the nomenclature that I've created within the AudienceStream interface. And most interestingly, because I'm looking at a current population of data against real-time users, any insights that I come to conclusion on, I can actually go and execute against within AudienceStream, either via a connector or, again, through the data layer enrichment, right? Because the data that exists within AudienceStream exists within both tag management as well as within the action engine for the connectors. So we will actually update the Tealium AudienceDB data set, the schema within Amazon Redshift, based on whatever schema you generate within AudienceStream. So if I add a new badge, within 5 minutes, it'd be updated within the Redshift solution and mineable. We additionally will update and automatically build out new tables, right, for specific data types like tallies and lists and funnels, etc., so that you can actually understand from a tally, because it's a subsection or subtable, what those data values are. In fact, I can use that now as another dimension in Tableau. Additionally, any metric or count therein within the tallies and lists automatically become measures, so that I can actually drag and drop this information in to understand things like, average order values, time in site, etc. And the net of this means that I can actually start to look at and build dashboards, right, regarding the population of users within AudienceStream. I can mine the data within AudienceStream and make decisions and make actions based on those theories that I come up with within the solution.
Very cool. And the cool thing, you're touching on some really good aspects here. One of the great things is you don't have to wait to the end of the day to get at your data, right? So this information is coming across intraday, so you can make changes, like you said, be reactive, update the data object, or take action on the data, but you don't have to wait to the end of the day to have the information to then update the dashboard here. So that's a really good aspect about that piece. And then, like you're saying, the visualization, the dashboards, the capabilities, it's all right there at your fingertips. So visitor-based, event-based, it's all right there. Now it's just the creativity of whoever's building these dashboards to understand what they're trying to get out of this information, especially forecasting like you're showing there. So really
That's
clever.
right. And it's all about getting this data, whether it's event or audience data, out to our customers and our partners in the format that best fits their needs and their technical levels, right? If the customer or yourselves have the abilities to process this data and do the schema generation and do sort of the heavy lifting of hosting that data, then we'll direct this data to you. If you want us to queue it up so that you can batch process it, we'll do that through our store solutions. If you want us to do all the heavy lifting and create a plug-and-play hosted solution where you can put any visualization, we're using Tableau today, but you can literally use any visualization solution, we can do that for you on Amazon Redshift. But the key being, the data that's going to the entire ecosystem from an event perspective is now available at your fingertips and your customers' fingertips, and the audience structuring and segmentation, right, that holistic one profile to serve them all, the one sort of unified view of your customer that you're sending to all of the vendors, to the tag management and audience stream ecosystems, can now also be made available in whatever formats necessary for deep analysis and mining.
Very cool. Very cool. I think this is granular like people were wanting to see, right? Getting to the data, getting to the tables, getting the rows, the information, drilling in to figure out who is an individual, what are they doing, that kind of cool stuff. So this is exactly what we wanted to see, Chris. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, welcome any questions.
Yeah, let's take a look. I don't see anything there other than a question earlier about zooming in on the user interface. But the good thing about this UI display is you can see everything. You don't see the nitty-gritty stuff, but you do see the full table of information across the board, so you can see all the aspects of the user interface. I don't see any questions just yet, though. So, all right, partners, throw a couple of questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll take those as they come across. Not seeing anything just yet, Chris. Like you mentioned here, this does reflect both PC data, tablet data, and you mentioned mobile device information, right? So one-stop shopping, multi-device, cross-platform use is all showing up all in the same destination, right? So the information you're looking at there could include the mobile data as well?
So the event store solution typically would be driven by the profiles, and typically our partners use different profiles for the mobile. So if you have one Tealium profile that has management across all of your different endpoints, then yes, we could do that. Also, what we would do is we would create buckets, and you would have the ability to have multiple event DBs. So you might have an event DB for mobile, event DB for website. So net on that is it's configurable on however you set up Tealium IQ.
Got it. And then for Audience Stream, if there is data warehouse information, exports from Oracle, for example, or exports from a customer relationship management system, and we load that into Omnichannel, and that was in week 1 where we went through the Omnichannel detail. So we've covered that in the past. But if we go up to the Omnichannel location and then include information and upload that information that might have occurred offline, visitor-centric, right? Visitor-centric, right, partners, for understanding it's all about the visitor and who that visitor is to augment their record with, truing up the data that might have occurred offline. But the omnichannel data, Chris, that's also included in here as well. So if we were to look in Tableau, would that include not just the data object detail, but does that include omnichannel upload info?
It does with one caveat. So those are essentially for Tealium purposes. Anything you upload into omnichannel, as I make an enrichment here, is just another visitor attribute, right? So it's treated like no other attribute, or just like every other attribute that's within this visitor list here. The one caveat is Tealium updates a record and associates omnichannel data with the record upon the next event, or it updates the record automatically if there is an offline transaction. And so that's a really kind of minutia detail there, but considering many of you are actually working with the solution, it's an important one. Yeah. if you have a connector that is scoped to take an action, I'm just going to pick on Marketo here. If you have a connector that has an action to do something at the end of the upload, then we'll actually go through and do the heavy lifting and process all the data, which means the data in the AudienceDB will reflect the last omnichannel file. If the omnichannel data isn't really relevant and there's no action to be taken in order to reduce the number of events on our customers, what we do is we wait until that user clicks on the next page or is identified an audience stream, and then we automatically update the user's data set. So it's kind of a minor thing on the back end. It's a minutia point. But the net there is you can, yes, get your omnichannel data. You can put it in an audience stream, and yes, it will show up in AudienceDB.
Ah, spectacular. Yeah, that's like you said, that's not often used, but very, very valuable point there. That is good. We have one question that came across, Chris, just probably an opinion-based type of an answer, and I don't know if we're going to get into political correctness or cross some lines here, but one of the questions is, do we know of any customers of Tealium that are leveraging a visualization platform, right, similar to what you've been showing so far, instead of a traditional web analytics vendor? So you know, I'm not going to get into any names or product names or whatever the case happens to be, but we know what the traditional analytics vendors are. Do you know of anybody that's using this visualization type of a method instead of a traditional web analytics technology?
You know, I don't think it's ever going to be an instead.
Yeah.
I think that we're finding that there are some partners that are deciding to use maybe less robust web analytics solutions, because in the past they've sort of forced some of these web analytics solutions to do a level of granularity that they weren't really intended or designed for. And so, yeah, I don't think that, and we definitely don't advocate not using one. We really think that every vendor in the stack is got a value. I mean, and one of the big values that web analytics brings is it tells you things that you should at minimum be looking at, right? And it provides graphic interfaces and reporting systems and scheduling systems, and it helps people maybe who are more junior on the job get up to speed on what data they need, right, or need to be paying attention to. So there's a lot of value that web analytics brings. We are finding that some partners who have traditionally used web analytics for their deep analysis are shifting to these types of solutions and visualization platforms for that deep analysis, and then sort of downgrading their web analytics to more basic ones for that sort of basic level of understanding and monitoring. So yeah, I don't think we would say that there's anyone doing sort of full replacement, but I definitely think there's a lot of people who are adjusting just the way that they manage and look at their data and where and what solutions they use for different levels of mining.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I've seen something in the past where, you know, those traditional web analytics systems are also cookie-based analytics, right? So they're so centered on performing analysis against a cookie. Well, you know, we know cookies are not people. So the thing that Tealium's bringing to the table is a visitor-centric type of analysis, where the web analytics tools bring a cookie-centric analysis to the table. So, you know, there's differences, and I agree with you. It's not a replacement type of a strategy, but more of a complementary strategy. You get to do a bit more visitor-centric analysis with this type of capability, whereas the traditional analytics, there's still an important need there. And also, just foundationally, there's so many people that have learned and spent so much time in the last 12, 15 years for those analytics tools that there's a value there because people know how to use those as well. So,
yeah, I would say the one benefit that these new solutions, you know, bring to the table is they don't have what I call the collection directive, which is really just a fancy way of saying I don't have to think about a report that I want to see in 6 months and then make sure that I set up my tag correctly. It kind of goes out the window because you're just getting all the data that was on the page put in a way that you can look at it. So you can look and slice and dice it however you want after the fact. And with a little bit of skill, you know, that event level data set does provide first-party cookies and visit and session IDs, so you can do that level of sessionization and get to a similar level of data set. But it takes skill, it takes knowledge, right, and it takes experience to do those sorts of things. And you know, I don't think that that's necessarily easy to do, which is why we're seeing more of a complementary path than a replacement path.
Yeah, very, very good. All right. Well, we're about there towards the end of the session, so I wanted to see. We got a thanks from the person that asked that question about the web analytics replacement versus complement. So good. And so we're about to wrap up the session here. Any last questions? I'll do a last call for questions here, and in that, we'll probably switch back over to the deck, kind of start wrapping up. One of the key takeaways from this that I want to highlight is, the different means or the different methods of data, right? So we've got event level data and audience level data, right? So that's one key takeaway. And then if you break it into what Chris was showing as far as the matrix, it could be JSON files, right? But it also can be in a database format. So we've got file-based and database format of event level data and visitor level data. So that breaks into 4 different ways, a 2x2. And then there's the direct method as well, that if you want data instead of be sent over to a Redshift database or to Amazon Web Services bucket, we could just send that data straight over to an FTP location or IP address of a customer or partner destination, provided you guys are geared to receive that data and do something with that and store that information in a timely fashion. What other takeaways do we have, Chris? What are the important things for the data access for our partners to know? Any other thoughts there?
No, I think ultimately, Tealium as an organization, as many of you know, we really want to reduce the friction in the space as a whole, and we really do believe in first-party data and first-party data ownership. And so, our goal is to make sure that our customers and our partners alike get the data that's relevant to their business in a format and in a way that makes sense to them, right? That's what data access is all about. It's about openness and transparency of the data. It's data your way. And as we kind of develop the organization, we will continue to build more features and more functionality around these various delivery methods. In the not too distant future, we will be providing more plugins as we built out with Splunk, where you can actually use the Splunk connector and you can push the data right into Splunk, and then we have a Splunk plugin that will actually help to do the schema generation for you. We have plans on building out Tableau templates. We're working with other partners, MicroStrategies, Teradata, and amongst others, just to make it very easy and plug and play with these enterprise data warehouses and visualization solutions, just like we have with the content management e-commerce systems upstream.
Very good. Very good. And I'm looking, there aren't any more questions there. Spectacular, Chris. Thank you very much for your time. It's always good to hear the latest detail and the latest happenings with this particular facet of Tealium. So thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate your participation. And I want to thank our partners as well for taking part in today's webinar as well. This is the number 4 summer webinar series. I look forward to having everybody join us next week for number 5 of the 7-part series. And we'll go into a deep dive of the key capabilities of the data layer. And, again, as Chris was talking about here, when we have information that goes over to Tableau, as the information goes into different visualization locations, those tables are built out. Well, there's information and structure that's required, and we want you partners to understand the strategy, build the strategy, provide the strategy, so that way when we add tag management and build out the data object, you guys are doing that, right? So we want that understanding, and so we'll bring on our very own Armando Rosario, subject matter expert in the data object, data layer detail, and so we'll bring him on next week and look forward to having you guys join us then. So in signing off, again, I want to thank you, Chris, very, very much for participating today. Thanks, Chris. Absolutely. And that'll be a wrap. So thank you, partners, and looking forward to seeing you guys next week.